We're on the Strip. We're on our way to meet George. He's finally agreed to meet with us. It took a long time because he's very busy. He says he gets multiple interview requests per day, but he's finally going to sit down with us at the TV station where he's worked for decades.
This has been my office, amazingly. They've let me keep it all these years. And I have secret stashes of files and things all over the station because I'm a pack rat. I keep everything. This is where a lot of the stories that we did were created. All these things that have come out over the last couple of years started right here.
What brought you to Vegas?
I flipped a coin. I was living in Northern California. I had been the debate coach at UC Berkeley. I was tired of being broke. You know, I knew I had to do something. And I met these crazy bartenders from Las Vegas. And they told me about the town. They said, hey, you can write, you're a speaker. We know a guy in television, you can get a job there. So I moved here. We've done so many stories. You know, when I moved to Las Vegas, I didn't know there was an Area 51. I didn't know there was a Nevada test site, the most nuked place in the world. This is the center, the heart of the nuclear testing, where all these big holes, that's caused by nuclear bombs. And those bombs became tourist attractions by themselves. But all those brainiacs and scientists and engineers who amassed in Las Vegas at the same time the mob was here and showgirls, it was a really interesting historical time.
The wide variety and array of top-name entertainment is really what sets Las Vegas apart from anywhere else.
I met this bartender who was a mob guy. And he says, you want to drive a cab? So I was the worst cab driver in the history of the world. I didn't know where anything was. And during the same time, KLVX hired me as a part-time production assistant. And at night when I finished the cab driving shift, I'd go over to this nightclub, which was called the Oz, and all the mob guys were there. All the mob guys from the movie Casino would be there on a regular basis. And I got to know them. Back to KLVX, I would toil there, do whatever jobs they asked. About 2 months later, their anchorman quit, and they had open auditions to be the anchor of their newscast. I applied and I got it, and suddenly, less than a year in Las Vegas, I'm anchoring 2 newscasts. It was crazy. Could never happen again. And within a year of doing that, KLAS, Bob Stoddall, and a guy named Ned Day took notice of me, invited me to come over, and I've been here ever since. And in those days, we all did mob stories.
Like it or not, organized crime is part of our city's heritage. Mob money and mafia muscle put Las Vegas on the map.
There was so much going on. Every day was a bust, a gaming control board hearing, a trial. There was always something going on because it was the start of the push to get rid of them.
The City Commission has issued an emergency order pursuant to Nevada law, effective immediately upon service, suspending the license of the Aladdin Hotel.
And of course, because I already knew these guys, I not only had access to law enforcement, but I could talk to the mob guys. And it was really helpful to me in those formative days.
Again, like before the internet was big, I mean, was it all just files and paper?
Sure. These are mostly crime stories, cold case murder crime.
Would you do a file for every story, or what was your system?
Yeah.
People would mail you stuff, or I mean?
People would mail me stuff almost every day.
People send me little stuff that make me homemade saucers out of tin foil.
That's the stickers we hadn't made up when Mystery Wire was first created, my craggy old face there. This was sort of my little nerve center for a long time.
So you were a popular news anchor, popular investigative reporter. How did this UFO thing suddenly come into your life?
It was really a quirk. Ned Day and Bob Stoddall had broken a really big national story. They had information about a secret plane out in the Nevada desert, and it was invisible to radar. That's what our sources had said.
George Knapp's source was this man, John Lear, famed aviator, son of the founder of the Learjet, and soon to be influential in the conversation on UFOs.
Thanks for being here.
Okay, George.
To begin with, you're a pilot, an airline pilot, captain. You have held 17 different world speed records at one time or another. You're a member of the famous Lear family that all Nevadans are pretty much familiar with.
His father had developed the Learjet, and he had a passion for secret planes. So he and a group of people, they called them the interceptors, would go out into the Nevada desert and would sit outside of Area 51, the Nevada test site, to see what was flying around in the sky.
You don't sound like the kind of guy who would get hooked up in something that a lot of people would say is a bunch of nonsense.
No, it's just by coincidence that I got really interested. This about 2 years ago. My father saw a UFO and my brother did.
And one day, John Lear walks into the news station, this is in 1987, with a stack of documents, UFO documents, and he plops them on Ned Day's desk, and he says, Ned, this is the biggest story you will ever cover in your life. It's about a cover-up of massive proportions. You're going to become famous. You got to do this story. He pushes the documents over, and Ned starts reading them, and he pushes the pile back, and he tells Lear, this can't be true. If this was true, this UFO cover-up, then I'd already know about it, he says. I'm eavesdropping, as I tend to do. And I said, Mr. Lear, let me take a look at that stuff. So I read through it, and at the time I produced a little talk show, a half-hour public affairs show called On the Record.
Hello and welcome to On the Record.
And it would air on Saturday or Sunday morning at 6 or 7 o'clock. And I said, John, you want to do this show? And I put him on, and I just let him go.
I'll give you the bottom line.
Okay,
I'm not trying to sell it.
I want to hear your thesis.
I'm not trying to sell a book. I'm not trying to promote a lecture. This is based on what I've come across after intense research in the last year. And I have found out that the government has retrieved between 10 and 15 actual flying saucers, 3 of which have been in perfect condition, 1 of which they tried to fly. They have between 30 and 50 alien bodies in cryogenic storage. We even have the name of the person whose job it is to show these bodies to the heads of state and the people who are authorized to see them. They represent at least 5 different civilizations.
Okay, you mentioned the saucers and the bodies. Now, what kind of proof do you have that is true? How do you know that?
Well, let me take a look. Let me read to you first what the Air Force says about the bodies. First of all, I'm going to read from the Introductory Space Science, Volume 2, Department of Physics, United States Air Force. This is Chapter 13, Unidentified Flying Objects. Now, this is what the Air Force has the students at the Air Force Academy read. And it says, the most commonly described alien is about 3.5 feet tall, has a round head, arms reaching to or below his knees, and is wearing a silvery spacesuit or coveralls.
It blew me away. It blew away our audience. I didn't know what to make of it, really. And looking back on the tape of that show, I can see the expressions on my face. Is this for real?
Yeah.
This guy making this stuff up? He's nuts.
Coming up, opening the vault to decades of UFO bombshells.
April 25th, 1964 was the first official communication between our government and the aliens.
I've had my life threatened by them, my wife's life threatened by them.
Revelations.
What we've learned this week is that the government has lied to us about UFOs, has withheld information, has spied on UFO organizations, and has discredited UFO witnesses.
And steps the government may be taking to keep secrets.
The military has been installing secret sensors on public lands surrounding the base.
So there's your transmitter right there.
Plus, we set off to find Area 51 for ourselves.
Light just turned off again.
Welcome back. UFOs, are they real? We're talking with John Lear on the subject.
The most commonly described alien is about 3.5 feet tall and is wearing a silvery spacesuit or coveralls.
I can see the expressions on my face. Is this for real?
Yeah.
This guy making this stuff up? He's nuts.
Now, I'm not making this up. This is an Air Force. You can pick out an Air Force physics book and read this stuff. And at the end of the chapter, they go on to say, this leads us to believe in the unpleasant possibility of alien visitors to our planet, or at least of alien-controlled UFOs. Now, the picture that we have of the big head that the Air Force describes, this picture was drawn by an Army surgeon. These are one of the bodies that was recovered in the famous Roswell incident of 1947.
Tell us about that.
It was the first flying saucer that crashed and was recovered by the Army.
Originally, the Roswell Army Air Base announced it had recovered a flying saucer from a ranch outside Roswell. The story made headlines around the world, but hours later, higher up said no, it was a weather balloon. Pieces of the balloon were shown to reporters. Years later, the officer who first visited the crash site, Major Jesse Marcel, confided that the weather balloon story was a cover-up.
One thing I was certain of, being familiar with all air activities, that it was not a weather balloon, nor an aircraft, nor a missile. It was something else of which we didn't know what it was.
What was shown to reporters wasn't what he found.
The newsmen saw very little of that material, a very small portion of it. And none of the important things, like these members that have these hieroglyphics or markings on. And when the general came in, he told me not to say anything, that he would handle it.
Since Marcel's admission, scores of other witnesses have also surfaced.
And one of the surgeons that was responsible for the autopsy drew that picture.
This is an autopsy report, and you said the government goes to great lengths, the Air Force in particular, to discredit this kind of stuff. Where did this come from? How did you get this?
That came from the private collection of Leonard Stringfield, who was one of the premier researchers. He worked for the Air Force in the early 50s in a secret project reporting UFOs. Then as a civilian, he continued his private research, and this is out of his collection.
You think maybe it's a top secret area? If the Air Force actually does have them, maybe they got him here?
I'm certain they do. Up at the test site, there's a report that of the 3 that they got in perfectly good condition, at least 1 is up at the test site and has flown, and 1 was being flown as of 1981.
By us?
By us, yeah.
We mentioned at the top of the show that perhaps a breakthrough might be coming, that some of these people from MJ-12 or from the Project Blue Book who are in on the government's research and who saw some of this stuff might be ready to talk. We got about a minute left. Why don't you tell me about that?
It's our information that that half of part of MJ-12 wants to release it, part of it doesn't. We're hoping that we can do this, but of course, as researchers, we're not aware of all the ramifications. We just know of what we're looking at. So we would like to see them release it, but we really don't know if they are.
Okay, John Lear, it's been very interesting. You keep us posted.
Sure will.
Thank you. We'll see you next week with more of On the Record.
And as soon as that aired, I started getting calls, and it didn't stop. What was the deal on that guy? Is that for real? Do you have any more information? Are you going to do that again? I realized this topic touches the pulse of the public in a way that I did not understand and did not appreciate at the time. I had him back on again the following year, and in between I started reading about UFOs, just trying to separate wheat from chaff. It's a gigantic learning curve, and figuring out what makes sense and what's real is really hard. So I tried to educate myself and get ready for that next Lear appearance, and the response from the public was even bigger.
Now, on April 25th, 1964, was the first official communication between our government and the aliens. 3 saucers landed there by prearranged agreement. It was filmed by 5 high-speed cameras, 68,000 feet of film. The reason we know this is because in 1972, when they were going to release the first information about UFOs to the public, a very knowledgeable writer, his name was Robert Emenegger, was asked by the agency to write a documentary, which he did. And they were going to release this thing, and we had the whole history of the UFOs, and the last part of the documentary was the footage of the saucer landing. But in 1973, when they're ready to go, we had Watergate. And they were faced with 2 problems. Number 1 is they didn't think the public could handle 2 traumatic experiences at the same time. And number 2, they thought that the public would perceive this picture of aliens and spacecraft as a ploy by Nixon to divert the attention from Watergate.
The inevitable result of these charges has been to raise serious questions about the integrity of the White House itself.
So they shelved it. The documentary actually came out. It was narrated by Rod Serling, but instead of the real footage, they had drawings of these flying saucer landing, and they said, Rod Serling says,
let's look at an incident that might happen in the future, or perhaps could have happened already.
According to John Lear, this is the only snippet of real UFO footage that aired in the documentary.
You believe, in part, that the movies E.T., Close Encounters of the Third Kind, were not entirely just the creative products of some Hollywood director, that maybe there's more to that. Why don't you explain?
They were carefully guided by representatives from MJ-12, who is this organization that is in charge of the cover-up, in order to get us ready for the release of the information that there are indeed aliens.
To prepare us that the idea of benevolent aliens from outer space are going to help us out.
Unfortunately, they're not so benevolent, so they made probably one of the most disastrous mistakes when E.T. was put out. At that time was before we discovered what I call the double cross or the grand deception. And they were trying to get us used to the benevolent little creatures. but that isn't the case.
I had him on a third time in 1988, and he hinted at the time that he met this guy who was trying to get hired at this place out in the Nevada desert, and that he thought it was going to be a really big deal.
John Lear's new friend not only knew what was going on out there, he knew when and where to look to the skies.
Good evening. This is John Lear.
In March 1989, he accompanied a small group to the outskirts of Area 51. 3 Wednesday nights in a row, they watched a glowing disc rise above the mountains over Papoose Dry Lake.
Did you see that move it did?
No, I didn't.
It went like, it went boom.
The person who initiated the desert outing was a scientist who claimed he worked at Papoose on flying saucers. That scientist was interviewed live on television in May 1989 from Lear's driveway.
What George didn't know was that this would be even bigger than John Lear. It turned out to change everything we know about the government and UFOs. Coming up, the bombshell interview that opened the floodgates.
What about aliens? Any of those up there at Groom Lake?
I really want to steer away from that right now.
The phones go crazy. I get pulled off the set. The general manager comes back. What the hell was that? Is this for real? What did you just do?
And what was discovered out in the middle of the Nevada desert.
By the way, that's Area 51 up there.
Oh, is it?
Yeah, that's Groom Lake. That's Papoose Lake.
There's a movie right there to the left. See the left side of the frame.
In the spring of 1989, I'm anchoring the 5 o'clock news, and we would have a 5-minute nightly interview segment, a live interview with somebody on the set. Our guest on this particular day canceled at the last minute. I'm thinking, who could we get to fill this? I called up John Lear. I said, you said you had a guy who was going to work out there and maybe work on flying saucers in the desert. Can we talk to him? I don't even know his name. We put a silhouette, we created a silhouette interview. He used a pseudonym, and out this story comes.
Well, there's several, actually 9 flying saucers, flying discs that are out there of extraterrestrial origin, and they're basically being dismantled. Some are, well, in various stages of completion, built from other parts, and they're being test flown and basically just analyzed.
You say there's 9 saucers. How are those tests going?
As far as what?
As far as whether they're successful and that sort of thing.
Oh, well, some of them are 100% intact and operate perfectly. The other ones are being taken apart. I was involved mainly in propulsion and the power source. Basically, as far as I can remember, about half of them do operate, and the other half are just been torn down basically to analyze the components to them.
Where did we get these saucers? How did they come into the hands of the government?
I haven't the slightest idea, and you have to understand the information is very compartmentalized, and I was only allowed information that pertained particularly to what I was involved in.
But I mean, couldn't our government have made them as opposed to getting them from some alien beings?
Totally impossible. The propulsion system is a gravity propulsion system. The power source is an antimatter reactor. This technology does not exist at all.
He said, well, this is technology that we do not have. We were reverse engineering it, and I didn't know what that meant. I'd never heard of it before. Taking it apart to figure out how it works and to see how we might either be able to duplicate the technology or defeat it if we had to fight against it.
In fact, one of the reasons that I'm going forward with this information, it's not only a crime against the American people, it's a crime against the scientific community, which I've been part of for some time, or actively trying to duplicate these systems, yet they are in existence now and basically in the hands of the government.
What would happen to you if the government learned that you were giving us this information?
Anything could happen. I don't know. It's I haven't the slightest idea.
Well, you said you referred to getting into trouble. Have you had some repercussions already?
Yeah, I've been threatened with being charged with espionage. I've had my life threatened by them, my wife's life threatened by them, and I mean, I don't know where else you can go from there.
Will the government ever tell us about the testing, and do the Soviets know about this?
The Soviets were involved at some specific point. They were kicked out of the program rather abruptly in the middle. I don't know why that was or what happened. They're not very happy about it, and as far as them revealing it, I'm sure they have every intention of claiming that all the technology was developed here. and it was absolutely not.
If the Soviets were kicked out of this testing program, why wouldn't they tell us about this?
I have no idea. They weren't allowed all the information. Apparently they had some, and we were basically trading with them. As far as whether they have discs or not, I don't know. I don't even know if they had knowledge that we actually had any there. But they were involved to some extent, and I don't know how much.
What about aliens? Any of those up there at Groom Lake?
I really want to steer away from that right now.
Is the Star Wars program in any way related to what's going on up there? I know some people believe that maybe we're building Star Wars for something other than the Soviets.
This directly taps out of the Star Wars budget, which is very hard to follow because it requires huge amounts of money. It also it taps out of a lot of other places too that would be very hard to track down. But yeah, Star Wars is directly related to it. The United States Navy is the part of the government that really maintains control over this.
Well, we want to thank you for joining us. Pretty interesting stuff you've got to say. Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Well, more news in just a moment.
I mean, we couldn't get away with it now. We'd done no vetting at all, had no business doing it. He tells me this story. The phones go crazy. I get pulled off the set and pulled into the news director's office. The general manager comes back. What the hell was that? Is this for real? What did you just do? I said, look, I don't know if it's real. I have no idea. We just wanted to do an interview, but I'm going to find out.
Coming up, a concealed test site now exposed to the world.
Since those stories, tens of thousands of people have beaten a path out there to look around in the sky and to see whatever is flying around.
Wait until you see what else George uncovered at Area 51, things the government didn't want exposed.
And right here will be the time delay unit.
Well, there's several, actually 9 flying saucers, flying discs that are out there of extraterrestrial origin.
And he tells this story, and out in the desert, they'd built this facility into the side of a mountain, disguised it to look like desert so it couldn't be seen from the sky. And in that facility, he said, were these 9 hangars built side by side, and each one of those hangars was a flying saucer that came from somewhere else. So how do you know they're not ours? He said, well, this is technology that we do not have.
Area 51, a now well-known military base that is synonymous with UFOs, but it's still shrouded in mystery to this day, with the exception of what George Knapp uncovered there.
The military now admits what the world already knew. It has a, quote, operating location near Groom Lake, but the Pentagon says the base has no name.
By denying the base has a name, the Defense Department hoped to forestall a lawsuit filed on behalf of base workers who claim they were exposed to toxic chemicals while working at Groom Lake.
Despite official denials, the common name for the base has always been Area 51. We recently found this 1967 government map which lists that name. Subsequent maps left the name blank.
To those who suggest that Area 51 has been shut down or moved somewhere else, there are a few points that are kind of tough to explain. For example, the bus filled with employees that comes in and out of the base several times each day.
It's still there, all right, still closely guarded, but not much of a secret anymore.
By the way, that's Area 51 up there.
Oh, is it?
Yeah, that's Groom Lake. That's Papoose Lake.
So where is it? Can you see it on a map at all? Any of the buildings, or is this all pre?
No, you can see some of that right there.
Yeah.
And that's the runway, and then those are some of the buildings from when that photo was taken. There is an entrance to Area 51 from here. And we've been up there to do stories on other matters. And the Department of Energy staff is always funny. They would just say, just don't look that way. Just look this way. And of course I look that way.
Area 51 is about 150 miles outside of Las Vegas. We're on our way there now on a highway actually called the Extraterrestrial Highway. And this is a route that George has taken dozens and dozens of times over his career. It's not exactly an easy place to find. You can't just Google Area 51 and figure out where the entrances are. You sort of have to know what to look for. Okay, so we made it out here to Area 51. It is so eerie and quiet out here. We had to go down this long, windy dirt road off the main drag, the extraterrestrial highway, to get out here to the entrance. You really cannot get very close. Behind me, about a quarter of a mile, is one of the guarded entrances. There's barbed wire, there's armed guards there. We're pretty sure that they definitely know we're here. Trip after trip through the Nevada desert, George broadcasted the closest photos we've ever seen of Area 51.
These photos, never before shown in public, are about as close as anyone will ever come to seeing what the place looks like again. The dry bed of Groom Lake, corrugated metal buildings, a 3-mile-long runway, and some highly sophisticated radar and detection equipment. It's been known by many names over the years: Dreamland, the Ranch, the Skunk Works. If ever there was a place to test a secret new technology, this is it. And that's exactly what's been done here for decades. Area 51 is where Francis Gary Powers and the other U-2 pilots were trained in the 50s, and where the U-2 itself was developed. The SR-71 spy planes that spotted Soviet missiles in Cuba in the early 60s were also developed at 51. 51 is where stealth technology was nurtured, where Star Wars devices are still tested, and where all manner of CIA monkey business has been plotted and refined. The CIA built it for use in the U-2 program. This is rare footage taken from Groom Lake of some early tests. Current warning signs indicate it's an Air Force facility, but all branches of the military have used it, along with most major defense contractors. The common thread has always been EG&G, which has had the contract to operate the facility since the beginning. What goes on there today? Plenty. Highly placed sources say the base employs about 1,800 people. One of their main missions is to evaluate Russian defense systems, equipment that's in the hands of unfriendly nations like Iran and Iraq. Another program at 51 is the stealth helicopter, although the technology isn't far along. As for flying saucers, the military admits it has built these unmanned craft. It may not be a coincidence that the Air Force's only unmanned aerial vehicle squadron is based at Nellis. Whatever's flying around out there still attracts visitors from all over the world.
It's still newsworthy in Europe?
Yes. No, also in Europe, Area 51 is well known.
And this is all closed off, this whole area?
Yeah, it's a secure facility. I mean, they would used to occasionally have tours out there, but it's kind of hard to get in there now. So.
Do people live out there at all, or are they all commuted?
They have a little town where people will stay for a short period of time.
Our report set off a UFO stampede that is yet to diminish. Tens of thousands of people have trekked into the desert hoping to see a UFO, inspiring the extraterrestrial highway and creating a new industry for Tiny Rachel, which has become a UFO merchandise center and a hub for saucer watchers.
It probably peaked in '97, coinciding with the 50th anniversary of Roswell, because we had media out here every day.
The hype has been good to Rachel, but has given the military fits. Their secret base was no longer secret, and security officers had numerous run-ins over the years with over-exuberant alien hunters who crossed the line or came close to it. Base security resorted to high-tech spy gear, even low-flying choppers, to keep the saucer nuts out.
There's really nothing out here. It's very, very remote surrounding Area 51. Now, we've heard stories that people have actually found surveillance equipment in the brush out here. The only strange thing that we've seen is there's this black wire that runs all along the perimeter road outside the base. George first revealed the lengths the government appeared to be taking to keep Area 51 a guarded secret, profiling a citizen whistleblower on a mission to expose it.
I found 31 or 32 of them so far.
Retired astronomer and desert rat Chuck Clark has a new hobby. He's prowled the hills and deserts of Lincoln County for several years now. Over the past few months, he's discovered the military has been installing secret sensors on public land surrounding the base. Using a frequency counter, he can tell when his vehicle has tripped the sensor. When that happens, he looks for the hard-to-spot wire atop the device.
This is our sensor right here.
Then he digs them up, takes pictures, and puts them back.
There's your transmitter right there. And we'll come around here. And right here will be the time delay unit. and you'll see it's clearly marked U.S. government property.
Clark isn't a terrorist or spy, but is angered that hikers, four-wheelers, or photographers, anyone who uses the backcountry, is being monitored by the military on public land, miles from the boundary of the base, a boundary which is clearly marked by ominous signs.
It's a little overkill in my opinion. They have about a 25-mile buffer zone out here, and it's all terrain like this. It gets rougher as you go. Why they have to put stuff outside the line, it escapes me.
During the I-Team's visit last week, 2 sensors were located, and base security wrote down the plate numbers of our vehicles. We returned 5 days ago and drove to the rear entrance of Area 51. 3 days after our visit, FBI agents working with Air Force Intelligence and the Joint Terrorism Task Force raided Clark's home in Rachel and seized photos, records, and his computer. Is it legal for anyone to touch military sensors hidden on public land? The government doesn't think so, although Clark hasn't been charged with anything. Is the military trying to silence this outback gadfly?
And they're sort of paranoid about this location, and I don't see why.
After those stories, Area 51 was changed forever. It created so many headaches for the camo dudes and the people that patrol Area 51 and try to keep the public out.
The so-called camo dudes have assumed legendary status. Oddly, despite all the security headaches, the alien lore has seemingly been embraced by the military. Base personnel are regular customers at the Alien.
I let them come here and have a quiet time. I don't try and get into their own personal stuff. I don't want that. Because if we started to pry, they'd back away.
Yeah, a lot of the patches and caps and things, they, probably half the guys on the base out there have them. We know guys that work there that have come in and bought things to take out there because they don't have any official things.
Since those stories, tens of thousands of people have beaten a path out there to look around in the sky and to see whatever is flying around, UFOs or secret planes. Every major news organization in the world has beaten a path to Area 51's door. A lot of them made fun of me and fun of the whole alien scenario, but they've all been out there. It's one thing to make fun of our stories about Area 51, but you've never been out there sitting in the desert night after night as we've done. You haven't interviewed the witnesses. You haven't dodged the security guards and coyotes and filed the FOIA request. You haven't done it.
Coming up, retaliation against the Area 51 whistleblower.
It's as if someone has made him disappear.
Well, they're trying to make me a non-person.
And all these years later, what secrets does Area 51 still hold?
Something's out there.
We went to find out.
Light just turned off again.
Despite the speculation, no one who knew Area 51 from the inside ever talked publicly about the saucer story.
Well, there's several, actually 9 flying saucers, flying discs, that are out there of extraterrestrial origin.
He tells me this story. I mean, we couldn't get away with it now. We'd done no vetting at all. I don't even know his name. I get pulled off the set and pulled into the news director's office. The general manager comes back. What the hell was that? Is this for real? What did you just do? I said, look, I don't know if it's real. I have no idea. We just wanted to do an interview, but I'm going to find out.
The live interview with the shadowy Dennis drew international attention.
Actually 9 flying saucers, flying discs.
Despite numerous inquiries and feelers, Dennis has remained anonymous until now.
Sodal, the news director, and I arranged to meet this guy. We went up to Lear's house. It was sort of an uncomfortable situation in the beginning because Lear wanted to control the whole thing. He wouldn't tell us the guy's name, but the guy had signed a guest book at the entrance to Lear's home, so I already saw his name. I knew what it was.
His real name is Robert Lazar, a young scientist with eclectic interests. The choice of Dennis was an inside joke. He says that's the name of his superior at Groom Lake. It wasn't a joke to Dennis.
He called right after and he said, "Do you have any idea what we're going to do to you now?" And I said, "Well, no." He hung up the phone.
Lazar's story is by any standards fantastic. He says he's telling it in order to protect himself.
We go in there and we start talking to the guy who turned out to be Bob Lazar. He told us his life story, where he'd gone to school, where he'd worked before, and some of what he had seen out there.
He says he was hired to work at an area called S4, which is a few miles south of Groom Lake. At S4, he says, are flying saucers, antimatter reactors, and other working examples of technology that is seemingly beyond human capabilities.
Right, this came from somewhere else. I mean, as bizarre as that is to believe, but I mean, it's there. I saw it. I know what the current state of the art is in physics, and it can't be done.
After 3 or 4 hours of grilling him, we look at each other and go, holy crap, what if this is real? What if this is true? This would be the biggest story in history. But it's also perilous for us. If we go after it and it blows up in our face, it could destroy not only my reputation and his, but that of KLAS too.
Checking out Lazar's credentials proved to be a difficult task. He says he earned degrees in physics and electronics, but the schools we contacted say they've never heard of him. He also said he worked as a physicist at Los Alamos National Lab, where he experimented with one of the world's largest particle beam accelerators, a half-mile-long behemoth capable of generating 700 million volts. Los Alamos officials told us they had no records of a Robert Lazar ever working there. They were either mistaken or were lying. A 1982 phone book from the lab lists Lazar right there among the other scientists and technicians. A 1982 clipping from the Los Alamos newspaper profiled Lazar and his interest in jet cars. It too mentioned his employment at the lab as a physicist. We called Los Alamos again. An exasperated official told us he still had no records on Lazar. EG&G, which is where Lazar says he was interviewed for the job at S4, also has no records. It's as if someone has made him disappear.
Well, they're trying to make me a non-person.
Explain. You called where?
Well, the schools that I went to, the hospital that I was born at, past job, and essentially nothing comes up with my name in it.
He smiles, but out of futility, knowing the whole thing must sound ridiculous.
I don't think there's any secret flying saucers at Area 51. I suspect that there was something like that out there at one point because of people that I know have seen it.
So where would they be now?
Well, either they moved them further out into the Nevada test site. If you're out there at night, you will see these pockets of light that pop up in the darkness at places that do not exist. Something's out there.
After the sun goes down, it is a different vibe out here. It's almost totally pitch black. If we switch to the night vision, you can see better out here. I've never really experienced anything quite like it. There's no city lights. The military base, Area 51, is behind me. It's just wide open. The noises are interesting because it's obviously nature noises. You can hear the crickets. But then we've also heard military aircraft for the last probably hour or so. Obviously doing some kind of training missions. You can hear the planes flying overhead. You can't always see them. Sometimes there's flashing lights, sometimes there's not.
There's a movie right there to the left. See the left side of the frame?
And there's also been some other lights that have sort of popped up over the mountains and also in the brush. The light just turned off again. Oh, there's a plane.
It's true. What I have seen is true. I don't know about the big story, where they came from, what they're like, but certainly these crafts came from another, not just another planet, another solar system entirely, extremely far away, and they're here.
What we've learned this week is that the government has lied to us about UFOs, has withheld information, has spied on UFO organizations, and has discredited UFO witnesses. Now, none of this proves that UFOs are real, but it does indicate a disturbing level of interest, government interest, in the subject. If the government won't tell us what it knows, what about science? Well, science is supposed to stand for the investigation of the unexplained, not the explanation of the uninvestigated. And so far, science has avoided the subject like a plague. It's like what Roy Neary, the main character in the film Close Encounters, had to say: all we want to know is what's going on.
was so cocky in the beginning. Well, this field is a mess. This is just, 95% of this stuff is nonsense, and it's explainable, it's prosaic. And I figured, well, look, what this topic needs is a good reporter. I'll have this all whipped into shape in 6 months. And of course, that was ridiculously optimistic.
6 months turned into a 36-year Las Vegas career for investigative reporter George Knapp. Did you have any interesting meetings with anyone UFO related around here? Do you go to any certain restaurants or?
All of them. The Peppermill, where we grabbed lunch, that was like my office annex. I would meet all kinds of people from Area 51 there.
George helped reveal the very existence of Area 51 through his interviews with Bob Lazar.
Tonight we're going to delve a little deeper into the subject with the man who was the impetus for our reports in the first place, Bob Lazar. Bob, good to have you here. A thumbnail sketch of yourself for those who might not be familiar with your background.
Lazar was a young scientist who claimed to work at the secret base called Area 51 near Groom Lake, in an especially hidden area called S4, where Lazar claimed crashed UFOs were stored.
Actually 9 flying saucers, flying discs. This came from somewhere else. As bizarre as that is to believe, but it's there. I saw it. I know what the current state of the art is in physics, and it can't be done.
This is one of George's reports from 1989 about what exactly Lazar says he saw.
According to Lazar, his employer was the United States Navy. He says he and other government employees would gather near EG&G, fly to Groom Lake, and then a very few people would get into a bus with blacked out or no windows and drive to S4.
When you get off the bus, what do you see?
It's a very interesting building. It's got a slope of probably about 30 degrees, which are hangar doors, and it has textured paint on it, but it looks like sand. It's made to look like the side of the mountain that it's in, whether it's to disguise it from satellite photographs or what.
He says he was never told exactly what he'd be working on, but figured it had something to do with advanced propulsion. On his first day, he was told to read a series of briefings and immediately realized how advanced the propulsion was.
The power source is an antimatter reactor. They run gravity amplifiers. There's actually 2 parts to the drive mechanism. It's a bizarre technology. There's no physical hookup between any of the systems in there. They use gravity as a wave, using waveguides, almost like microwaves.
It took a while, Lazar says, before he actually saw one of the flying discs. However, there were hints everywhere.
Right, they had a poster, and it looked like a commercial poster almost, like it was lithographed and you could buy it at a Kmart or something. But they were all over the place, and it had the disc that I coined the term the sport model, was lifted off the ground about 3 feet at area S4 on the dry lake there, and the caption on the bottom said "They're here," and those are just all over the place.
Later, he got to see the real thing.
When I was let in, it was the first time I saw the sport model in the hangar sitting down, and I was told they could have walked me in the front door, but they purposely wanted to walk me by it. I was told not to say anything and just keep my eyes forward and walk past the disc into the office area. And I did, and as we went by it, I just kind of stuck my hands on it just to run it alongside the thing, and that was about the smallest time. After that, I got to see it actually lift off the ground and operate.
But you also, in between that, you saw more than one.
Yeah. The hangars are all connected together, and there are large bay doors between each one. And there were 9 total that I saw, each one being different. Like they had the assortment pack.
One of the 9 flying discs he says he saw at the base, which was designated S4, looks exactly like this UFO photographed in Europe. Lazar called it the sport model.
I gave everything simple names. There's the top hat one, and the Jello mold, and the sport model operated, without any hitches at all. It looked new. If I know what a new flying saucer looks like. One of them looked like it was hit with some sort of projectile.
Even before he saw the sport model operate, Lazar says, he suspected that the ship came from somewhere else. The realization slapped him in the face the first time he glimpsed the inside of the disc.
I got to look inside, and it had really small chairs, and I think that was the first confirmation I had. That was just a shocking thing, because every time before that I was able to label it, well, this is just a little advance that a group of scientists had formed, and they're keeping it secret. And yeah, we could have built a big disc like that. That's no problem. And we could have adapted these to make it fly, but why does it have little furniture inside? Essentially little seats, and things began to click together just all too fast.
A few of the discs had been completely dismantled to find out how they worked, Lazar says, but others were fully operational.
The bottom of it glowed blue and began to hiss like high voltage does on a round sphere. It's my impression that the reason that they're round and have no sharp edges is to contain the high voltage. Like if you've seen on high voltage systems, insulators, things are round or else you get a corona discharge. In either case, it began to hiss as in high voltage, and it lifted off the ground quietly, except with that little hiss in the background, and then that stopped as soon as it reached about 20, 30 feet.
Lazar's interview with George got attention far beyond Las Vegas.
早速この番組のプロデューサージョージ・ナップ氏に会見した。
Suddenly, people around the world were paying attention to it. There was something called Paranet that was transcribing every piece as it aired, and then they'd send it all over the world via this fledgling technology called the internet. There were people dubbing it off and then showing it in movie theaters and charging admission to it. We got inquiries from all over the world, other media everywhere. When that Lazar part of the story broke in episode 5, 6, and 7, man, it went to a different level.
Lazar was credible enough for the Nippon TV network. Nippon devoted 2 hours of prime time to a special on Lazar and UFOs in March.
Lazar was invited to go to Japan to interview with reporters there, but along with all the attention came disturbing threats.
The day we were supposed to go, had tickets in hand, even went down and bought yen down at the currency exchange. We got threatening phone calls. I mean, that basically said, you'll never make it back here. So we really sat down and just thought, how important really is the interview, and we didn't go.
Lazar told George that security was tight and that fear and intimidation was used as a brainwashing tool.
It did everything but physically hurt me.
Put a gun to your head?
Yeah.
And said what? Actually put a gun to your head?
Well, they did that even in the original security briefings. They had guards there with M16s, and guys slamming their finger into my chest, screaming in my ear, some people pointing weapons at me. Like I said, it's not a good place to work.
When you came out with the series and then the special, was there pushback?
Yeah, well, there was. And during the making of there was pushback. We were followed. Me, Lazar, a couple of others of us. I know it's hard to believe that they would go to that trouble. But they knew I was working with him. They knew what I was digging into. They would go to his house when he wasn't there, open up the doors and windows, write stuff on his blackboard, move things around, just to mess with his head. He went to the gym one time with a friend of his. He was really getting kind of panicky about the whole thing. He has a gun. He had an Uzi in his car for self-protection. He goes into the gym, has a workout, comes out an hour later. The doors of the car are open. The windows are rolled down. The Uzi, which had been in a glove box, was there sitting on the front seat. They were just letting him know that they're watching him.
Coming up, threats and also questions about whether Bob Lazar was telling the truth about what he saw at Area 51.
Did you knowingly lie when you said you had actually seen anti-gravity propulsion in operation?
No.
The results of several lie detector tests.
I am telling the truth. I've tried to prove that.
Plus,
as soon as they talked to me, they got visited the next day by people proclaiming to be government agents.
More sources coming forward as the government ramps up their intimidation tactics when we come back.
They had guards there with M16s, and guys slamming their finger into my chest, screaming in my ear, some people pointing weapons at me. Like I said, it's not a good place to work.
It was one of the standout scoops for famed UFO reporter George Knapp. His interviews with Bob Lazar, a young scientist who claimed to have worked at Area 51. But was Bob Lazar telling the truth? George put him to the test in a series of reports.
Lazar agreed to undergo a polygraph exam as part of this report. Polygrapher Ron Slay asked about the technology Lazar had seen.
Did you knowingly lie when you said you had actually seen anti-gravity propulsion in operation?
No.
The results of this exam were inconclusive. Lazar appeared to be truthful on one test, deceitful on a second. Slay recommended that a second examiner be brought in. Polygrapher Terry Tavernetti runs a corporate security operation and is a former Los Angeles police officer. He put Lazar through 4 tests and concluded there was no attempt to deceive.
And I left there thinking that I feel we do have some credibility to what the subject had to say. And that's when I went to some of my colleagues.
Tavernetti sent the test results to a third polygrapher who agreed the results appeared truthful. The charts were then sent to a 4th examiner who did not agree, suggesting Lazar might be relating information he'd learned from someone else. The polygraphers conferred and decided they would not issue a final statement on truthfulness until more specific testing can be conducted, and that's where it stands. Tavernetti believes that difficulty in determining Lazar's truthfulness stems from the fear that was drilled into him.
I think we're talking about a subject here that is so far-reaching, and it is so emotional. And when you're dealing with emotions, this is polygraph, because we're dealing in polygraph, you're looking at fear. The fear of getting caught telling a lie because something bad will happen to you if you do.
Well, I am telling the truth. I've tried to prove that. What's going on up there could be the most important event in history. You're talking about contact, physical contact and proof from another system, another planet, another intelligence. That's got to be the biggest event in history, period.
And it's real.
And it's real and it's there. And I had an extremely small part in it, but I'm convinced that what I saw is absolute proof of that. There is no way we could have created those systems. There's no way we could have made the discs, the power supplies, anything to go with them.
You believe his story, don't you?
Yeah, I do. Yeah, I've got to know him pretty well over the last couple of months, and I believe he's telling the truth.
George's connection to Bob Lazar led other tipsters to start calling him. But again, there was intimidation that made his quest to learn more increasingly difficult.
I had people call me during those projects, those first 2, who offered to give me information about reverse engineering flying saucers. 6 of them, right in a row, were visited. As soon as they talked to me, they got visited the next day by people proclaiming to be government agents who told them, shut the hell up.
Even one of the polygraph examiners, former police officer Terry Tavernetti, says shortly after his involvement with Lazar was made public, his employers were contacted.
The corporate offices where I'm employed received a telephone call from a government agency wanting to know why I was getting involved in something that I shouldn't be. And I asked, well, what agency? What was said? Did they identify themselves? And I said, because I'll be more than happy to talk to them. And I was refused this information, told that he didn't know, meaning my boss.
Tavernetti says his house was also burglarized around the time he did Lazar's polygraph.
As an investigator of over 20 years, I don't believe in coincidences. There's a reason for everything. I mean, could it have been a random residential burglary? Yes.
One case, the source was a cop. He worked at the courthouse, and she worked at the courthouse as a court reporter. And he said, she told me one time over lunch that she had worked for a defense contractor and heard this information about Roswell and wreckage and bodies and it being stored out in the Nevada desert. I asked this cop friend, would she talk to me? He goes, I think so. Here's her number. So I called her, and she gave me the broad strokes of her story. I said, can we meet? If I need to hide your face or your identity, change your name, I will. Very next day, she gets visited by these 2 guys. They told her, you know, you're still subject to your security clearance. And then they go, we know your daughter lives in LA and that you travel across the desert to see her and she comes to see you. It's a big desert out there. It'd be a shame if something happened to either one of you. This is a veiled threat, not so veiled threat. She was scared to death. Not only wouldn't talk to me, I called her 10 years later after she had left that job, and she still wouldn't talk to me.
So they were definitely listening to you.
They were listening to my phone, and it really pissed me off. I mean, they couldn't have obtained a warrant to do it. No judge in Nevada would approve something like that. They wanted to know who was offering to give me information. And it really made me mad. Again, I was already sort of on a crusade because of the FOIA documents, the paper trail, and the lies. This really got under my skin. And so we produced another 9-part series in May of 1990, and it hit even harder. And that sort of sealed the deal for me. It made me the UFO reporter, whether I like it or not.
Coming up next, the UFO reporter was about to get 2 of his best sources
I've been interested in the subject for a long time.
You've said you don't think it's little green men. Is it possible that there's no one who knows the ultimate answer?
I don't think no one has the answers. I'm anxious to get the facts. I think it's something we should look into.
U.S. Senator and a rich American businessman take George's UFO reporting places he never imagined. It was George Knapp's bombshell 1989 interview with young scientist Bob Lazar that opened the door to new UFO sources.
Two really important things that happened in association with that project. One was Harry Reid.
Nevada Senator Harry Reid saw George's UFO series and was interested.
You know, George, I'll have to look at this. I have heard about this exact story. I've heard about it as kind of a preview of your program. I'm visiting with you once before. I'm anxious to get the facts. I think it's something we should look into.
He says, yeah, well, I'm going back to Washington. My car will pick you up. You can talk to me on the way to the airport. And so I spilled the beans to him, what I'd learned so far. He didn't kick me out of his car. He was interested. He said at the end, well, look, keep me in the loop, and I'll do the same for you. And that friendship that sort of started there, the secret conversation, started that day. It lasted for the rest of his life and had a major effect on my life.
Senator Reid visited Area 51 several times over the years, but never commented to George on the record about what he saw.
I had never wanted to ask you on the record because I know there are limits on what you can say, but you've been there multiple times.
I've been there quite a few times, and it was something that was really necessary, especially with the Soviets, with their satellites. Today I see things that were experimental up there that are now everyday deals.
Were there a lot of off-the-record conversations?
Oh, yeah.
Documents he would give you that you weren't reporting on?
For years and years and years. It would ebb and flow at different times, depending on what else I was working on. I'd go to Washington, if not every year, every other year, to interview our congressional delegation, and always made a point to spend time with them. And he'd always pull me aside, and we'd have our own little UFO conversation out of ear reach of his staff. Drove them crazy. Drove them crazy for years because neither one of us would tell them what it was about. Now, after a while, they figured it out.
And George, as you know, I became terribly interested in this. And rather than think about it, I said, well, I'm going to do something about it.
In 2007, Reid and other senators authorized the Black Budget Study of UFOs, AAWSAP, which stands for Advanced Aerospace Weapons System Application Program. A contract for the program was awarded to a company called BASS, an offshoot of Bigelow Aerospace, owned by Las Vegas space entrepreneur Robert Bigelow, a billionaire who had funded his own UFO studies for years. Bigelow first connected with George after his initial UFO reports in the late 80s.
I started getting all these calls. One of them came from this businessman I'd never heard of. Hold for Robert Bigelow. Okay. He gets on there. Boy, that was really good. He kind of introduces himself. I had no idea that he had already been funding UFO research. He offered to help. He was wanted to give me money to go ahead and pursue the investigation. I said, no, can't do that. I'm working for Channel 8, but I appreciate your offer of support, and maybe we can get in touch. That friendship that I developed with Bigelow then proved so important in the long run, and eventually Reid and Bigelow got together, and I introduced him.
George reported on every step of the new project.
Bigelow built secure facilities inside his aerospace company. At its peak, the study had 46 scientists working at the Nevada facility, writing reports and analyzing data that came in from the military. Rapid response teams were dispatched to the scene of UFO events. Over the 5 years, the project cost a total of $22 million.
So you knew that the U.S. government was funding a secret program, and you just had to stay quiet.
Yeah. They asked me to be part of it. I was asked twice to get a security clearance so that they could bring me in and show me stuff. I was not privy to everything that was going on. I did not have a security clearance, so I'd get bits and pieces, big picture stuff about what they were doing. And most of what they did was not classified, but it was very restricted. You know, it was kept in a stovepipe.
And during the 5 years of research, Robert Bigelow's team made an unexpected finding. Details of a UFO resembling a tic-tac off the west coast of the United States.
Over a 2-week period in late 2004, an unknown 45-foot-long tic-tac-shaped object played cat and mouse with the U.S. Navy off the coast of California.
Even before a bombshell New York Times story on the tic-tac, George knew about it.
The USS Nimitz aircraft carrier and its support ships, carrying the most sophisticated sensor systems in the world, repeatedly detected recurring glimpses of the Tic Tac, but were unable to lock on. On November 14th, F-18s were ordered into the area and saw it up close. Veteran pilot Dave Fravor, commander of the elite Black Aces unit, says the Tic Tac reacted to the presence of the F-18s, then took off like a bullet fired from a gun.
If you go from what I saw, which is very close to what Bob describes, that would change mankind.
It's one of the reasons why you believe what you saw in 2004 was not ours. It was
yeah,
not.
Like I said last night, I think a lot of it was, if you'd have asked me in 2004, I didn't know. My thing is, it's now almost 15 years later, and that technology is still, no one has figured it out or no one has seen it. You can hide stuff for a long time, but hiding stuff for 15 years is, I think it gets harder and harder.
Something that revolutionary.
Yes, I mean, that's literally it. Why would you hide a huge technology leap for mankind if you haven't?
OSAP had created the world's largest UFO database, 200,000 cases, a data warehouse of what it was. They put together an amazing pile of work in a short period of time. A stack of documents, if you printed out the pages, would be taller than either of us. In-depth reports about different topics. The Tic Tac, there's an investigation, an explanation of the Tic Tac that is so much more advanced than anything that anyone has seen. Congress has not seen one page of that stuff. The public hasn't seen one page of it.
Where is it all?
Good question. I don't think the DIA can find it.
You know, we've seen these reports and documents that we've obtained and photos and information from the Navy about these drones buzzing their ships, and they don't know where they came from. They can't track them.
They're coming in swarms like bees, like insects.
I don't know if it's scarier that it's an unknown or if it's scarier that our adversaries have made great strides in technology.
And always remember, Russia, former Soviet Union, is run by a man who ran the KGB. They had as many as 30,000 agents at one time, KGB agents. So Russia's involved in this, no question about it.
Coming up, George travels 6,000 miles from Vegas to Moscow.
There was a period of 78 to 88 where the Russians had these dramatic UFO incidents.
And wait until you hear what he came back with. Plus, never before heard parts of our exclusive interview with UFO whistleblower David Grush. As George Knapp started to become synonymous with UFO reporting, he started to look outside the U.S., specifically at Russia.
So there comes this high-level Russian scientist to Las Vegas. We have a couple of beers. I ask him about UFOs. You ever hear anything about it? He goes, no, don't think so. Doesn't ring a bell. We have one more beer. He goes, you know, now that you mention it, there's a friend of mine at KGB who said he had worked on a report about UFOs and some documents. I could ask him about it. I said, you think there's anybody else who might know in the Ministry of Defense? Well, I know all those guys. I could find out. So he said, yeah, I'll do it.
Behind the scenes, George planned a high-stakes trip in 1993 with Russia in turmoil and sources ready to talk.
We're there 10 days. We were pulled over by cops 7 times. There were people stationed outside of our rooms at the hotel. I would put little traps to see if they went through my stuff, which they did every single day. We met with this guy, Boris Sokolov, who had been the head of what was then the largest UFO investigation conducted by a government in the history of the world. There was a period of 78 to 88 where the Russians had these dramatic UFO incidents, and they decided to create a program to get to the bottom of it. And man, well, that was really something. I won't explain exactly how I got access to the files, but I did. Thousands of pages from the Russian Ministry of Defense. Many of those pages were classified at the time. So then we had the problem of how to get it out.
Well, that's what I was going to ask.
It was pretty tricky.
What did you do?
Well, these documents, in those days at least, the Russian Ministry of Defense would stamp classification on the top page of the document, and the rest of them weren't marked at all. It was clear they're military documents, but without that classification, it's a lot less onerous and dangerous. I just removed the top pages of all those documents. And I threw the rest of it in my suitcase with some caviar, by the way, which they told us we were not allowed to take out caviar. So I threw some caviar in there as a diversion. And it worked because they opened it up. They're looking, hey, caviar, not allowed. Close the suitcase back up. And then the other pages, I carried through security. I carried on my person. If they'd caught me, I'd still be there in a gulag somewhere, but they didn't. And the goal was maybe we'll find out more from the Russians about what our government knows about UFOs than we'll ever learn from our government itself, which is true. We did.
George started sharing his findings with key players in Washington and his friends, Senator Reid and Robert Bigelow.
I'd ask Colonel Sokolov, what's the interest? What are you trying to do here? And he said, it's really simple. These craft can do things that we can't. They fly circles around our best aircraft. We know they do the same thing to you. And we figured if we could find one, figure out how they work, we could kick your ass in terms of stealth technology. Because at that point, we were way ahead of them.
3 years later, George returned to Russia and came back with even more bombshells.
I interviewed this guy named Maltsev, who'd been commander of the entire Russian Air Forces. And he told me about these encounters that Sokolov had recounted. 40 different incidents where Russian warplanes chased UFOs. And boom, they were gone. In 3 of those cases, though, the Russian warplanes crashed. 2 of the pilots died. And after that, this guy Maltsev issued an order, leave them alone. You see a UFO, leave them the hell alone, because, quote, they have incredible capacities for retaliation.
More than 25 years later, a Pentagon whistleblower shared the exact same fears that George reported back then. A secret Cold War with some of our biggest enemies.
We're in a competition with their adversaries to understand this. It's a multi-decade Cold War that has been under our nose for so long, and there is no good way to level the playing field and hold other nation states accountable if they're doing unethical or illicit activity as it relates to this subject. And I think the obtuse secrecy is actually putting us in a very dangerous position where a country might make a breakthrough. Let's say it's an adversary of ours, and it is so destabilizing.
In June 2023, a worldwide exclusive interview on News Nation revealed alleged secrets within our own government.
What conclusion did you come to at the end of your time on the UAP task force?
The UAP task force was refused access to a broad crash retrieval program.
We have spacecraft from another species.
We do, yeah.
How many?
Quite a number.
You're kidding.
No. I thought it was totally nuts, and I thought at first I was being deceived. It was a ruse. People started confiding in me. They approached me. I have plenty of current and former senior intelligence officers that came to me, many of which I knew almost my whole career, that confided in me they were a part of a program. They named the program. I've never heard of it. And they told me, based on their oral testimony, and they provided me documents and other proof, that there was, in fact, a program that the UAP task force was not read into.
I've been told that there have been attempts to bring down craft.
There have been instances, and there are certain techniques.
Have human beings been hurt or killed by a non-human intelligence?
While I can't get into the specifics, because that would reveal certain U.S. classified operations, I was briefed by a few individuals on the program that there were malevolent events like that.
Including this never-before-seen moment where Grush describes the roadblocks he says he faced when trying to pry for answers.
You're telling us we're being lied to.
Yeah, it's an obvious intelligence community disrespect to the legislative branch, and I tried to gain access in my official capacity, and I had one agency say, "Oh yes, we have what you're looking for. We'll reach in." And then 2 months went by. They wouldn't return phone calls. They wouldn't return inquiries by the UAP task force director, my colleagues with the same kind of statutory authority to investigate this. And in one case, they tried to kill all my security clearances from that particular agency is almost like a show of force. Like, please don't ask again, Dave. And I thought that was extremely unprofessional.
And yet you were legally entitled to seek this information.
I stated my official capacity to look into this. This wasn't me trying to get access to a program I wasn't supposed to or anything like that. This was in my official capacity.
Grush's story, first shared publicly in June, was actually known to George well before then.
I had been told I might be introduced to somebody. I'm sitting at a bar, and they're shooting video of me, just cutaways. And at that exact moment, while they're getting video of me, Dave Grush walks up and introduces himself. And we started a conversation and got to know each other, and we've been talking ever since. And boy, he shared with me something that I wasn't allowed to make public then, but it was in his whistleblower complaint, what he had filed with the Inspector General, because at that point, they were already coming after him. Now, he had come to that conference to meet people, to learn about UFOs, to interact with UFO World a little bit, and to interact with Jay Stratton, who was, the guy who had given this assignment. He didn't come alone, though. Grush came with his boss and his boss's boss. They also went to this thing. They knew what he was up to. They knew what he had found. They haven't come forward, which is interesting that nobody's asked them questions about what he was doing or whether it was legitimate. But they were there because they knew what he'd found, and they wanted to support him. We've heard these stories for years, that there's reverse engineering, crash saucers, UFO secrets stashed in there, hidden by the use of hundreds of millions of dollars of national security dollars that are unaccounted for, that Congress has no idea what it's being spent on. Go find it. And he did. He had the clearances to go into those special access programs, interview the people, put them under oath, get their testimony, collected it all, and sent it up the stairs, up the chain of command. And once it became clear what he was doing, what he was going after, he was messing with the fundamental forces of nature. These are powerful interests that have this stuff. The keepers of the secrets are real, and they're not going to give it up, so they came after him.
Coming up, it all comes full circle as George is front row for historic UFO congressional hearings.
A multi-decade UAP crash retrieval and reverse engineering program.
David Grush's claims on News Nation sparked an unprecedented move in Washington. A historic hearing specifically focused on disclosure and getting answers about what the government truly knows about UFOs.
Mr. Chairman, ranking members and congressmen, thank you. I'm happy to be here. This is an important issue, and I'm grateful for your time. My name is David Charles Grush. I was an intelligence officer for 14 years. I was informed in the course of my official duties of a multi-decade UAP crash retrieval and reverse engineering program.
And seated right behind the three key witnesses was none other than George Knapp.
So how did you end up in the front row right there of the hearings?
Well, these members of Congress haven't been at it that long. They knew they needed help. They wanted to set up a hearing.
Do you have any personal knowledge of people who have been harmed or injured in efforts to cover up or conceal these extraterrestrial technology?
Yes. Personally.
Would you have had the capability to defend yourself, your crew, your aircraft?
Absolutely not.
Sir?
No.
My main concern was that it needed to be bipartisan. It can't just be Tim Burchett and other Republicans, one-sided kind of a thing, because the temptation to be really partisan, you can't help it. And he agreed to that. He said, yeah, we're going to make it bipartisan. We got some Democratic members who are interested in it. And he did. He kept his promise.
And thank you all for being here and the courage it took to come forward and again, the sacrifice that each of you have made. Is it possible that these UAPs are testing for vulnerabilities in our current systems?
Yes.
Yes. Possible.
Is based off of the information that you've been privy to, is there any indication that these UAPs are interested in our nuclear technology and capabilities?
Yes.
By external observation, sure, that could be a fair assessment, yeah. Yes.
Is there any indication that the Department of Energy is involved in UAP data collection and housing?
I don't have an answer.
I can't confirm or deny that in a public setting. No.
Could you do it in a secure setting?
Yes.
For the record, if you were me, where would you look? And I put that as an open question to the three of you.
I'd be happy to give you that in a closed environment. I can tell you specifically.
Thank you. Commander Fravor?
I would say, and I've told people that you have to know where to look. They're not going to divulge it to you because of the classification levels. But if you know where to look and who to talk to, which is exactly where Mr. Grush can point you, then you have them.
Okay. Mr. Graves?
I was an operator, so I was depending on folks like Mr. Grosh to do that homework.
Okay. Thank you very much. I yield back to the chair.
Congress, it's a perilous moment for them right now. You saw those members of the House, they were very passionate at that hearing. They wanted to get to the bottom of this.
If you believe we have crashed craft, stated earlier, do we have the bodies of the pilots who piloted this craft?
As I've stated publicly already in my News Nation interview, Biologics came with some of these recoveries. Yeah.
Were they, I guess, human or non-human biologics?
Non-human, and that was the assessment of people with direct knowledge on the program I talked to that are currently still on the program.
And was this documentary evidence, this video, photos, eyewitness? Like, how would that be determined?
The specific documentation I would have to talk to you in a skiff about.
Gotcha.
Absolutely astonishing for me to see Tim Burchett and Matt Gaetz, as far right as you can get. And over on the other side is AOC and Jamie Raskin, and they're all asking pointed questions. They're all into it. These are not questions just prepared by staff. They're listening to the witnesses and asking good stuff. And they're pissed off. But as I have said 100 times, the keepers of the secrets are better at their job than people like us are at ours. And they're not going to let this thing go easily. The pushback has already begun.
So yeah, it's interesting. Burchett said that too. There were other witnesses that backed out.
Well, I think there was a statement about other witnesses. They didn't pass their security clearance or something, and that was not the case.
Okay.
There was 2 other witnesses that we tried to get who declined to be part of it, but they might do it at some future point.
Well, how do you think the Pentagon is going to react, given your experience covering this issue?
They've resisted being truthful for 75 years. It's not going to turn around on a dime. But after what happened today, I don't think you can put the genie back in the bottle.
Mr. Knapp, having covered this for years, decades, is today surreal for you?
Yeah, it's weird. It's just weird to see it finally happen. I had a moment where it kind of overwhelmed me, thinking about, gosh, this is happening right in front of my eyes after all these years. Progress finally being made. It was quite a moment. Quite a moment. I wonder, are we going to be able to figure out these mysteries even if we have, say, a crash saucer? Does it tell us where they're from or why they're here or what their interest is in us? I've been up pretty far up the food chain. I don't know anyone who knows the big picture.
Do you think there's someone behind the scenes that does?
I think there are people behind the scenes who know a lot more than we do, a lot more than I do, a lot more than OSAP learned. I've heard about these people for a long time, and somebody pulls these strings. I don't know that there was ever a MJ-12, but I suspect that there was an organization like that. I'd love to have the answers while I'm still alive and kicking here, but I'm not sure that that's going to happen.
It seems like this is the worst possible moment for you to retire. Which you're obviously not retiring, but are you working harder than ever, would you say?
Seems like it. I tried to retire. It lasted 2 months. And yeah, it'd be pretty hard to walk away from it now.
George has teamed up with UFO researcher Jeremy Corbell for his podcast, Weaponized. They continue to be at the forefront of breaking some of the biggest stories.
Congress has made it pretty clear. They want this information. They want to have access to it. They want whistleblowers who have information, direct hands-on experience with these legacy programs to step forward. Those people are really reluctant, as we know. We talk to them.
We have passed people through the process that are verifiably who they say they are.
Other people whose names are not yet known to the public or to the UFO world who want to tell the story.
And George says there's more to come.
There are more whistleblowers, and there will be more that will come out. We know some of them. There are some big shoes still to drop.
Do you think it's sunk in for you how pivotal you were in all of that?
I lucked into it a lot, and I'll take credit where, I'll take credit if somebody wants to give me some of it here and there. But moving here in the first place, getting to know Lazar and Lear and all that, to where it led.
You may not find out in a month, a year, 5 years, or 10 years, but you'll look back at what I'm telling you now, and you'll say to yourself, my gosh, the son of a gun was right.
You got to work it. Like a reporter does. Yeah. You got to, if it becomes your beat, you work it.
I think what we can say about this is there is a body of information. There is some kind of a phenomenon here that can't just be written off. The government is sitting on a certain amount of information that it isn't letting us know about. And I don't think the topic has been fairly treated by science and journalism. It would be interesting if we could have a much larger investigation by someone else.
It does seem a lot more mainstream now, though, to have these conversations.
I'm thrilled when I see other media covering it. It's fun. The public's interested. Our listeners, our viewers, our readers are interested. And it's important. too. I mean, the big picture, if we could get to the bottom of it, it changes everything.
George Knapp, Channel 8 Eyewitness News.